Please join me in welcoming our three young changemakers to the stage. It's such a pleasure to have you up here. I will introduce you all properly. So we have Jean Linis-Dinko, who's data governance specialist at VPS. We have Stephanie Lett-Dawkins, who's an account supervisor at Citizen Relations. And we have Candace Williamson, an account director at the Romans. And I think it's really nice that not only is this already by far the most diverse panel at this conference, but it's also a very global panel. Jean is a Filipino who's living in Australia. Candace is here from the UK, and Stephanie representing America. So I'm really glad that we can get a broad range of perspectives in this conversation. So let me start, I think, by saying, we are very proud to be partnering on this initiative. Obviously, it's really important, but I think if we're being honest, we know that the Young Changemakers program alone is not enough if we really want long-term change in this industry. What's required is really sustained investment in the next generation of talent. Whether that's happening, whether it's happening quickly enough, I think is up for debate. But we're going to talk through some of the approaches that are and maybe aren't working. We're going to talk through how better connection and better community can be fostered, the effectiveness of mentorship and coaching programs, and how we can really get to a point, perhaps, where we have better inclusion, better representation in this industry, and the kinds of initiatives and programs that are genuinely required to develop that next generation of talent. I think if we're being honest as well, we would agree that the three people we have on stage right now is what the future of this industry needs to look like, as opposed to perhaps what the broad demographics of what the audience in this room looks like. So I'm very glad we could have these voices up on stage to discuss this. I wanted to start with a couple of statistics as well. A little troubling, perhaps. Davis and Gilbert's survey of 183 public relations firms, which they released yesterday, showed that DEI activity has slowed down noticeably in the industry over the past couple of years. Obviously, there were a lot of commitments made when the Black Lives Matter movement emerged, but 42% of firms, only 42% of firms, increased the number of employees this year from historically underrepresented groups, which is down from 60% in 2022. So that's not something that we necessarily want to see. I can say that at Provoke Media ourselves, we have struggled to get agencies to report their numbers over the last 12 to 18 months, despite all of the rhetoric that we saw 2 to 3 years ago. So that is something of the backdrop. Our changemakers, though, I think can perhaps provide a little optimism to this discussion. And they have started, quite appropriately, they started off by changing things. They changed the title of this session, which is now How Deconstructing Perceptions of BIPOC Could Be the Key to Meaningful Retention. So let's start there. Let's start with perceptions of BIPOC. And why do the three of you think that they need to be deconstructed? Candace, I'll start with you. Of course, please don't wait for me. Please feel free to jump in whenever any of you have something to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think BIPOC isn't a term that we use in the UK. It's quite an American phrase. I'm not the biggest fan of sort of grouping subcultures together. I think it's very irresponsible and really dangerous because I think, you know, those who are from a Black African background or Black Caribbean or, you know, Asian, we all have different ways of viewing the world and, you know, different upbringings. We have different things that make us tick and what we're passionate about. And I think when it comes to retention and making sure that we're empowering these sort of underrepresented groups, I think the first step is really understanding that. And educating yourself on what makes them move and what their passions are and their goals are in terms of the workplace. And I think, you know, that's the first step in really helping to empower them in agency life and making them feel like they belong. Because I think, you know, ultimately, if you are a person of colour and you don't feel like you belong and you haven't sort of assimilated into agency life, you're not going to stay for long. So I think it's, yeah, super important to really take that first step to understand the different subcultures and not use sort of generalist terms to group everyone together.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, lumping all people of color together like that is so limiting. And when you start to understand that, like from my Black experience, right? Like no two Black people are necessarily the same, and there's a beauty there. There's so much more creative thinking, diverse thought, better ideas, better work that can come from understanding those differences and kind of like leaning into the differences that each person of color brings.
Like these two ladies, I actually do not subscribe to the notion or the phrase BIPOC. I'm from the Philippines originally. As Candace and Stephanie said here, I also do not like how we are being lumped together because it obscures class distinctions. It obscures economic disparity within the group. I feel like it is reductive because it doesn't take into account the material conditions that has allowed racism to flourish. And it has separated, I feel like it has separated class relations from race relations, especially in a society where we try to fight a system that prioritizes profit over people, no matter what their color, creed, or caste. And I'm Filipino, as Arun mentioned here, and I am, you know, I'm acutely aware of my privilege. I recently just submitted my PhD. I speak English. I work in a tech-adjacent role, and my privilege that was afforded to me has allowed me to have a little bit of social acceptance and opportunity, which you know, has granted me these opportunities and privilege, or so-called privilege, which I actually do not want to call privilege, because I feel like the term privilege is very loaded, and that it is just used to discredit political opinions. So what I call privilege is more like a basic fundamental human rights, and that I do not believe that we should remove privilege, but actually make sure that everyone has the same privilege as everybody else. And going back to that notion of BIPOC, I feel like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term model minority, but I feel like it is very similar to how the term model minority is being used. The term model minority is usually often used to describe the Asian community, because we are described as, here in the States, we're described as successful, we assimilate well. But as we know, that the Asian community is not a homogenous group, it's the largest continent. And yeah, you know, it definitely goes beyond the understanding of BIPOC.
So, I mean, the kind of takeaway I get from all of you there is that there's more will is required to really understand subcultures, the different nuances of subcultures, and to resist the urge to group everyone in convenient buckets. And I think we all know that those buckets make reporting numbers easier, make compliance easier. Do you think the will exists to genuinely understand the different subcultures that are in play, and they differ according to different markets, you know, even different cities, different countries? It requires a lot of work, it requires investment. And how do you feel the agency world is doing in that regard?
No.
You go.
I think from my perspective and also like the perspective of my peers that are also in the industry, it seems somewhat performative a lot because, you know, you'll join an agency and they'll say, we're diverse, we care, you can be yourself. And then you're met with unwelcoming cultures, people don't want to get to know you, you've got a code switch all day, or you don't speak to people in positions of power until they need a multicultural voice or until there's a crisis and they want to check on you. And I think it needs to be more intentional. Like, people of color need to be able to have a sense of community, be able to connect. And I think that starts with wanting to genuinely understand the people of color the way that you understand your colleagues that are not of color.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, no, I don't. I think there's definitely still work to be done. I think otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this panel right now. I think that being a true ally doesn't just, it's not just about being a true ally in the workplace, it's about how you live your life. And I think that there's nothing wrong in saying that you don't know and that you don't have the answers. I think it's powerful to stand in your truth and say, you know, I want to be educated as someone who is non-POC, because I also think that, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and if you've grown up a certain way, how can you expect to understand the way you know, people of color move and how they live their lives? So I think it shouldn't be shunned upon to say that you don't know the answers, but I think taking that first step and saying that you need to educate yourself is really important.
And I think that's a bold move in itself. Like, this taking the step to say, I don't know enough is so strong. It's like putting your stake in the ground that you're trying. And like, trying is the first step. So, and I feel like even that, so many people are not even trying, which is kind of like saddening.
There's a lot of things that the two of you mentioned there, which I will pick up on. But Jean, just wanted to come to you to see if you had anything to add on that question. Do you think that the will exists within the corporate world in general to tackle these issues?
Well, I have never worked in the corporate industry, so I really cannot say that. I've always worked in non-profit, but I hope so. I am optimistic, but I would love to, you know, I guess when speaking to people in the corporate world, what I want to say is to always treat employees as human beings, you know, not as a means to an end for profit, you know. And definitely, I would also like to draw attention to BIPOC leaders who are in C-suite positions, who have become the very problem they swore to destroy. Because they assume that just because they got there in their position, they would suddenly think that everyone else would have the same amount of privilege, courage, opportunity, but that is a lie. And you know, that assumption is very problematic. And I do hope that, you know, that when we get into a position that is far from the grassroots, we look down, or we look, how to say that in English? We look back and say, I was once there, and I will not do what I didn't want others to do to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So just summarize some of the things that you've all just said. Stephanie, you mentioned the difficulties involved in code switching all day. The only time you speak to someone senior is when they need a multicultural voice. Candice, you talked about just the importance of diversifying beyond the workplace in terms of how people live their lives in general, which, you know, is something perhaps leaders in this industry should take note of, I think. And Jean, you mentioned treating employees as human beings, and that, you know, maybe chief diversity officers are part of the problem rather than the solution. I think these are all you know, I mean, this is a lot of truth, I think, but these are all really important points for people in this room to take note of. Now, when we, you know, let's take our Agencies of the Year process as an example. We ask a few questions about what agencies are doing to improve their diversity and inclusion, and you know, we get a lot of information. Agencies are doing a lot. There's a lot of words anyway in these forms. Many are partnered with external providers. Many have chief diversity officers. They have mentorship. They have coaching. They have training. There are many employee resource groups. So there seems to be a lot of activity. But what is going wrong? Where is the disconnect? Because it sounds like that activity isn't translating to the kind of change that the three of you would like to see.
Yeah, definitely. I think from my perspective, I think diversity and inclusion shouldn't just be a bolt-on to, you know, the HR team or your HR strategy. It should be part of like the cultural fabric of your agency. I think having a 360 approach to your D&I strategy is really important. You know, what are you doing internally and externally? And that working together will help, hopefully, foster an environment where people of color can feel included, empowered, they can progress. You know, we want to see more people that look like us on management levels and, you know, sitting in your seats now. I think from an internal perspective, definitely things like making sure that people of color have the right coaches and mentors, and I think it's really important to have more than one. I think both non-POC and POC as well. Making sure that, you know, line managers are going through training to really understand how to like work with people who are neurodiverse or, you know, people who are from, you know, underprivileged backgrounds, because again, I think that person is one of the most critical people in your career, especially when you start a new agency. And I think externally, you know, what work are you doing with your clients? You know, when we're pitching for new business, a lot of the time we make sure that we have people of color on talent slides, and it seems so simple, but it's, you know, it doesn't happen often. So I think it's making sure that you're hitting sort of every angle and ensuring that, yeah, you're fully operating inclusively.
Yeah, and that was so eloquently said. Like, I think all of the systems that are put in place, they're a good notion, especially like the trainings, right? I'll use that as an example. You usually bring in a third party to do a training, and then after the training, nothing has happened, right? There's no one to make sure that you're actually putting those trainings to work. And I think that's where trainings fall short. On the topic of like mentorship and coaching, I think that is something that's so important and it needs to be ingrained in all agencies. And I didn't realize how important it was until I got to Citizen, because like you don't know what you don't know. And Citizen, from the moment I got there, they set me up with a growth coach, and my growth coach has been able to help me, literally be with me, coach me, and help me, you know, get to where I am now and be able to sit on a stage and have these conversations. We also have a mentorship program where, you know, you fill out a questionnaire based on what you want to get out of your mentorship, and then they pair you with someone. So even if it's something that's like, if I want to be mentored on public speaking or I want to learn something about social, I can get a mentor just for that. And I think things like there needs to be more of that, because I didn't even know that was a thing that I could have. And I spent so many years trying to figure things out by myself, when if I had a coach, if I had a mentor, I probably would have been a lot further, a lot faster.
Just staying on this topic quickly, what about the employee resource groups? Because, you know, that seems to be a crucial pillar in the DEI strategies that we see. How effective are they in your opinion, and where and how do they fall short?
I think they're only as effective as the work that's put in. Because, and I say that because like ERG groups, they're kind of like, you think of it like an elective, like it's not billable hours. So there's the opportunity for it to get pushed and it gets canceled because we're all really busy. And at that time, I think then we're falling short, and then that's just something that's on paper to say that like an agency has. Most agencies do have these ERG groups, and they need to make a point to be meeting, if it's even as small as like once a month. Like it takes so little to make a big impact. Like the first time I joined the Black Employee Resource Group, I was like, wow, I didn't even know there were this many Black people in this establishment. And this was good. And we meet once a week and we just get to kiki and talk with like-minded people. And that was like, oh my gosh, who knew? So it takes so little, and it only takes 30 to an hour per month. And I think more agencies need to just commit to that. Like I know it's hard, I know we're busy, but like you make time for what you want to make time for, and at the end of the day, I think you see it'll be so beneficial. Like people can thrive when they have their own communities.
Yeah, just to add to that quickly, I think you actually have to give a shit. I think we work in comms, we can spot bullshit from a mile off, and I think people just, we want authenticity. We don't care that, you have to have all the answers right now. I think it's just putting that first step forward and saying that you want to educate yourself. I think one thing that I'm seeing at a lot of agencies in London is that we're doing a really great job at hiring diverse staff at that sort of exec level. But then you get to sort of my level, junior management, and there's, where do they all go? It's, what happens? So, I think that's the issue as well. I think it's making sure that, we're empowering people, we're making them feel like they belong, and we're actually putting the work in and caring.
Where do they all go?
$1 million question.
I think they do freelance. They work for themselves, because I think once you get to our level, you kind of see through the smoke. You understand that people are not caring, and then it's like, if you're not caring and you're not getting paid enough, I don't have to stay here. I can take my talents and work for myself and take on freelance clients. So I think that's what ends up happening. We can see that you don't care, but we also understand that we don't have to stay.
Jean, how important is it that it's not just about, we're going beyond face value here, and that we're actually diversifying the experience for people in the workplace, rather than just looking at this as, purely a numbers game?
Well, I guess my take would be that I'm going to wear my union hat here. I'm a unionist back home. That you cannot solve a systemic problem with Band-Aid solutions. Mm-hmm. No matter how diverse people you put on your employees, as long as the system, which was built not for us, the problem will stay. If you really want your BIPOC people, employees to stay or to retain, advocate for wage transparency. Workers should be aware of their compensation relative to their peers. Equal pay for equal labor. Free childcare, particularly for women. Progressive benefits, leaves, sick leaves, and of course, do not bust unions, because that's the only way for you to retain people, is to actually treat them as human beings, not a means to a profitable end.
This year, we saw the stats, and we've seen a slowdown. And some of that, I think, can be attributed to the passage of time since the murder of George Floyd. But some of it, I think, can also be attributed to, economic challenges. Do you feel like some of these challenges are less important to agencies because they feel that, in this economy, they have more important things to worry about?
Yeah, probably. It's so tricky, though. I think, even despite a recession, I think D&I should still be part of the rhetoric of an agency and part of your focus. I think, I can't remember where the research is from, but having truly diverse teams actually accounts for 30% more profitability in agencies. So I think if you're looking from purely numbers, it does work. I think it also goes back to that piece where if that is the case, then, are you doing that to be performative? Do you really care about it? I think even during recessions and time of economic crisis, I think it's even more important to put a focus on D&I and support those people who are from underprivileged backgrounds that it might be affecting even more so than non-POC.
Yeah, and I think it's a disservice when you push D&I to the back burner. And when you think about like what brands are looking for now, they are looking for diversity. They are looking for the multicultural voice. So it would be more beneficial, a bigger return on interest for you to over-index on D&I, because the brands want to hear from us. The brands want to know what people of color are saying because they want us to buy into their products more and more. So I would argue that it's way more important than most people think. And I believe that there would be such a big return on investment. There'd be more creative thinking, more award-winning, work done if there were more people of color at the table making the decisions, sharing their thoughts.
Let's talk about what does work, because we talked a lot, I think, so far in terms of what doesn't work. And I wonder do you sometimes feel like you are also, not only are you kind of, you're diagnosing the problems, but you're also expected to solve them to a certain extent. And I don't want you to feel like you have to have all the answers here, because it isn't your responsibility to solve these problems. But from your perspective, if we're talking about things like mentorship, coaching, resource groups, leadership in general, the entire kind of talent experience at the agency, what has worked from what you've seen?
I mean, there's so much you could say in response to that question. I think for me, it goes back to giving a shit. I think it's being a true ally. I think outside of the workplace, I think, reading books, educating yourself. What does your Christmas dinner table look like? Is it all full of people that look like you? And if it is, then why are you going to care when you come to work? It's not going to be at the top of your priority list. I think being a true ally is, standing in your truth and admitting that, you don't have all the answers. And I think by doing that, it will sort of naturally translate in the workplace, because you'll want to hear more from your POC staff, you'll care more, you'll help them feel more empowered. And again, going back to that authenticity piece, you can feel it. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
My 2 cents. Very similar to Candace. So the panel before this talked a lot about connection and community, and I think that's what it boils down to. People of color want to feel a connection. They want to feel that they're welcomed within the community. And when that happens, they're more fulfilled. We are more open to creative thinking. And from my experience at least, when I feel a connection and I feel that there is a community there, I'm more likely to stay there, because I know that there's lacking in connection and community. So I'd rather stay where I know that I have it. So if there was more connection, more talking, more creating these communities, more giving a shit, then more people of color stay where they are.
So more care, more connection, more community. Jean?
Isn't that the $1,000,000 question? I don't know. I feel like what works in one industry doesn't really apply in other industry, but I'm just happy to see the trend all over the globe that there are employees who are standing up to unchecked corporate power, and that's really crucial if you really, really want to retain people, is, again, treat them as humans.
I'm curious because, this conversation has been quite agency-centric, and Stephanie, you made the point that, brands want to hear more from people of color. It's so crucial now to all of their stakeholder engagement efforts. Do you feel there is more progress perhaps being made on the brand side? Do you think there is a difference in terms of the experience for people of color when we're talking about perhaps, for example, in-house communications departments versus agencies?
I think so. I think I've started to see more brand partners diversifying what their teams look like, which I like to see. I love when I meet a new client and I meet a new team of clients and there are like 2 or 3 people of color. I'm like, that's nice. This is what I like to see. So I think there is more of that. There could be more, but the steps are being taken, which I can appreciate.
Yeah, I think I would say so. I think it's hard to like fully say because obviously we work in agencies. I think from an agency perspective, we've been able to win 2 massive beauty brands recently at the Romans. In some of the feedback we got is because we had an all-black team. One of them was for Dove Crown and the other was Shea Moisture, which is an afro and textured hair care brand. And they said, out of all of the agencies that pitched, you guys were the only ones that had people of color on your team, which is insane. So I think, yeah, for me personally in the UK, I'm definitely seeing brands not only diversify their teams, but put more of an onus on wanting to give briefs to the right agency that has people that look like, the audience that they're trying to target. And if not, I think it's also okay to admit that you don't have that and, outsource, or, get freelancers in that can work on it and provide those insights.
Well, that's encouraging at least.
Yes.
Jean, as the data specialist on this panel, we have to, I suppose, ask a question about AI, as always. There's a lot of concern about people being replaced in this industry, as in many others. Should people of color be more concerned about being replaced if labor is going to become more digitized?
Since I have the audience here, I would like to address the misuse of the term AI. AI does not exist. It's machine learning. It's statistics. It's glamorized statistic, actually. So we all have this. The use of term AI in the media has made us overlook and forget that the systems do not think. The system, that this technology do not think, do not dream, do not create. And it takes away the accountability from the makers. So I would prefer, calling it as machine learning, or what it actually is, which is a giant spreadsheet. And I've done my fair share of training models, training machine learning models, because that was my PhD. But always remember that this anthropomorphizing or making personalizing technology that should not work or shouldn't be how we actually look at it, because we, as I've said, it takes away the accountability from the person behind the technology who actually selected or decided the data it was fed. And for people of color, as everyone mentioned here, that could mean job displacement, where automation could definitely disproportionately affect the community because they are overrepresented in low-skilled jobs and therefore more prone to automation. And yeah, I guess by looking at it in a way that it is not as grand as AI or generative AI or AGI, as what tech bros would probably call, we can look back and say that that this is a tool and it shouldn't be used in a way that would harm human value, that would harm human welfare, because that is where the alignment problem lies. We always think that technology would align to a certain human value, but the question is, whose value? At the end of the day, I'm pretty sure it is not the value, it's not the lives of one working class woman with 3 jobs trying to find food for her family.
So we have a few minutes left, so I wanted to give people in the audience a chance to ask questions of our Changemakers. So this is your chance, so please go ahead. If you're perhaps interested in creating more change in your businesses? Got one. Back here.
Hi. So first of all, thanks for this. Thanks for telling it like it is. I love one theme that emerged from this panel, which is being human in work. So I write a lot about intersectionality. So I wanted to ask the panel, what's the best way to look at talent? Yes, also the DE&I piece, but also look at talent in a way in terms of what unique strengths they keep on the table versus where they're from, because I'm a woman of color and I get that a lot. But I'd love to pick your brain on how we can address that, agency or brand side, just so the focus stays on talent and strengths that they're bringing to a pitch or a presentation. Thank you again.
I don't think I got that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
We couldn't really
either.
hear. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry, we couldn't hear.
Okay, going twice. Can you hear me now?
No.
Can we turn
The
back?
mic not be up
I
high.
can't really hear up here.
Oh my God.
I know it was a talent question.
Hi,
Yeah.
is this better?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, I promise I'm not representing Verizon.
Let's hope no one in the room is.
So I first of all, thank you. I really enjoyed the whole panel. Thank you for telling it like it is. My question was, I love one theme that emerged from this conversation, which is about being, looking at someone as a human. So I'm, semi-creative, semi-strategy, and the one thing that I write about a lot is intersectionality. So how can we systematically talk about what talent or strength is being kept in a pitch, in a presentation, versus where are you really from, or the whole trope that goes behind it. So I'd love for you to talk about that so we can bring that more when we work together. Thank you again.
But where are you really from? Go ahead.
That's a good one.
It's juicy.
I know. I'm like, how am I supposed to answer this?
I mean, in response to the part around what do you do when people ask those questions, I think that's what I got. Like, where are you really from?
Or is it, how do you differentiate? Like, I think it's the whole picture, right? Because if I'm understanding it correctly, it's they want us in the room. They want to hear, when we get a brief and it's a multicultural target, you pull in a person of color, you go, what do people of color think? And then you never talk to them again, which is common. And while that's, it's important to be bringing them in, it's important to have the person of color at the table. It would do such a service to take one step further and maybe know more about them as a person versus them as a person that is a person of color, right? Like, it might be beneficial to know that the Black person that's at your table, I don't know, likes country music. So then when you get, I don't know, a boot, a country, like a cowboy boot brand or something like that, you can bring in that Black person who also has an affinity for country music and that whole scene, just to use that as an example. But it's important to know what the people of color are actually into, because that opens up a whole nother, I guess, segment of thinking, because even if there is a brief that's not necessarily looking for a person of color, but they are looking for maybe someone that is into anime, you can pull in your Black colleague who's also super duper into anime, and you probably wouldn't have known to bring that person in because you didn't take the time to get to know them.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem pulling in, people of color or those who are, queer or neurodiverse on diverse briefs if you don't have a team that represents someone from that audience, because again, it goes back to you don't know what you don't know. I think particularly, you work in strategy, how can you come up with killer insights if you don't have those lived experiences? But I think it's only okay to do that if, you know, you are also putting in the work yourself to educate yourself on those experiences through that process. And it's not performative, and you're putting someone in for a one-off brief, and that's it. I think it has to kind of come from both sides.
Right. Like, I think it all kind of boils down to what Candace said earlier, which is like giving a shit, like giving a shit enough to really learn the people that like work with you every day.
Yeah.
We've got one more question there.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this conversation. Really great. Jean, you mentioned pay transparency. How important is that? Gail shared some pretty sobering statistics to start off the day, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts on pay transparency for the panel.
If you had any further thoughts you wanted to share about pay transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. So this wage is something that I'm very passionate about talking about. As I've said, wage transparency is crucial, so that, you know, talking about wage within the workplace should not be banned, should not be criminalized. And I've seen so many news stories recently where employers would not want employees to talk about wages, but that's, you know, that's bad, because then you would not be able to know if you're actually being underpaid or overworked and underpaid at the same time. And I guess part of wage transparency is the issue of when companies put job ads on LinkedIn or Seek, wherever, there's this always term which I abhor: competitive wage package. What does that mean? Competitive against what? My electricity bills. You tell me.
Just to add to that, pay transparency is like so important, and I think definitely growing up, it was like a cultural thing of like, don't tell anyone how much you make. Like, don't talk about it, hush, you know, because you don't want to know. But I think now, like my generation and also the generation, like Gen Zers, like they're talking about it. So if companies are not being transparent, like we're having those conversations anyway. So like we kind of know what's up. So we are kind of expecting or yearning for more companies to get on board, because the conversations are happening.
I'm afraid we're out of time, so we're going to have to move on to our next session. But if I take 3 takeaways from this, it's more caring, more connection, more community, and
More human.
treat employees like humans. Simple. Please join me in thanking our amazing young changemakers. Thank you very much.